that acceptance of religion, that naturalization of religion is evident, I think, in the recent presidential campaign and in the rhetoric of the president-elect. The U.S. is still a faith-based nation. Both atheists and religious extremists or fanatics are regarded as marginal and rare and un-American. So let me illustrate using the facts of a recent federal court decision declaring a faith-based prison rehabilitation program to be an unconstitutional program of forced conversion. So this is a case of state-forced conversion. And I should say that I was an expert witness in this case, and I have just published a book on it. So I'm not a completely external observer here. Now, the privatization of government services in the U.S. over the last 20 years or so has resulted in the outsourcing or devolution of a whole range of functions normally understood to be properly those of the state. Under the administration of President Bush, this privatization of government has included a vigorous effort to involve so-called faith-based providers as contractors for social services. And President-elect Obama has announced his commitment to this effort and his desire to extend it. At the same time, in the last 30 years, law and order politics, the war on drugs, and the resulting massive incarceration have placed enormous strains on the country's prisons. Recidivism is at an all-time high. And prisons, too, are being privatized in various ways. Among them through the contracting of rehabilitation programs to religious organizations. In 1999, the state of Iowa, beset by budgetary shortfalls and overcrowding in its prisons, contracted with Prison Fellowship Ministry to administer an in-prison program called Interchange Freedom Initiative, or IFI, in a wing of one of its medium security prisons. Now, Prison Fellowship Ministry, or PFM as it's called, is an international prison ministry that was founded in 1975 by convicted Watergate conspirator Charles Colson. Charles Colson is now a much published and admired leader within the neo-Calvinist wing of evangelical Christianity in the U.S., and probably the most well-known advocate for prisoners in the world, possibly at this time. The Prison Fellowship Ministry has an annual income of $50 million. It's a large organization. Now, IFI is described, and IFI is only one of their programs. They do many kinds of programs working with children. They do Bible studies in prisons. They do various kinds of short-term prison programs. But IFI is a new program that was developed in the prisons in Texas when President Bush was governor of Texas, which for the first time developed an in-prison residential program run as an 18-month, 24/7, Bible-based, Christ-centered program of personal transformation. So the prisoners in this program lived in a separate part of the prison that was entirely governed by Prison Fellowship. The prisoner's day in an IFI-run section of a prison, and this is in 5 states now in the U.S., is in some ways less restricted, in some ways more restricted and regimented than that of the general prison population. The IFI prisoner is awakened by guards at 5:30 a.m. for devotions, and then attends Bible classes, work assignments, counseling, and religious services for the rest of the day. Personal televisions and profane language are forbidden. The prisoner is immersed in a world of Bible verses and Bible stories and tested every week on his knowledge of the Bible. Every Friday evening he attends a revival meeting, and every Sunday he attends church services. The IFI prisoner is trained to interpret his own experience of the world and to change his behavior through the memorization of Bible verses and through studying lessons drawn from Bible stories. The IFI prisoner also, and this is critical, from the perspective of the prisoners, of course, lives in a less prison-like setting with more freedom of movement and privacy. IFI also includes an aftercare mentorship, which assists the prisoner in his return to the world. And while he is in aftercare, the prisoner is required to attend church weekly. Now, when I tell this story in the U.S., people are amazed. They cannot believe that American prisons are actually doing something like this. So we might ask the question, does the administration of such a prisoner rehabilitation program in U.S. prisons, and this is not the only one, by faith-based groups violate either domestic or international protections for religious freedom? And whose religious freedom needs protecting in this setting? That of the proselytizers or that of the proselytized? Supporters of the complaining non-evangelical prisoners in the Iowa prison, those who brought the lawsuit against both Iowa and PFM, argued that given the scarcity of alternatives in U.S. prisons today, the state contract with IFI amounted to a government program of forced conversion, even though prisoners volunteered for the program. IFI, on the other hand, argued that it had contracted with the government to address a secular problem, that of recidivism, and that it was doing so through an effort to teach prisoners the universal values, and these are quotes, these are the words they used, of integrity, restoration, responsibility, fellowship, affirmation, and productivity. IFI argued that it had no intention to convert and that it was simply using the Bible because that's its language. Its goal, it says, was not the making of Christians, but the making of civilized men. This is an argument, of course, that echoes across centuries of Christian missionary efforts. IFI also argued, however, that it was exercising its own religious freedom and promoting the religious freedom of the prisoners who desired conversion. There was tremendous ambiguity and slippage in the language at the trial between Christian and Universalist understandings of the human person and of the goal of rehabilitation. Whether and in what way IFI's program was properly termed religious was difficult to pin down. Arguably, I think both were right in the terms of this conference. IFI was both secular and religious, but so are all programs in prisons, governmental and private. Prisons were a post-Enlightenment invention of evangelical Protestants. There were not prisons before the Enlightenment, and they were specifically designed to lead to penitence and reform. Now, IFI lost the battle. The Iowa program was declared to be an unconstitutional establishment of religion and has since been closed. But it is by no means clear that it is on the losing side of the war. Few Americans, liberal or conservative, care about the situation of the millions of Americans who are incarcerated. And that's more than 3% of the population, the highest per capita rate in the world by a lot. We're way ahead of Russia.